The savannah sky split open with a growl that trembled through the earth like grief rising from its knees. Rain poured in relentless sheets, a southern storm unraveling its rage across cobbled streets and shuttered windows. Lanterns flickered in wrought iron sconces, casting trembling light against the evening sorrow. Down one narrow lane past the ivy-wrapped columns and weeping magnolias sat a woman on a wooden bench at a forgotten bus stop, her wedding dress clinging to her like a question that would never be answered. Amara Hill didn't shiver, not because she wasn't cold, her soaked skin told that story, but because she had grown up learning to carry pain with dignity. Still as the tulle and satin of her once cherished gown pooled at her ankles like wounded fabric, her breath came in shudders. She had stood in front of a church that morning. She had looked into a man's eyes. She had believed him forever. And now she sat beneath a rusted bus stop sign, her veil torn, her hair loosened into dripping curls mascara, tracing the history of her heartbreak. The storm didn't care. It danced on without mercy. She clutched the necklace at her throat, her grandmother's locket, the something old meant to bring luck. How foolishly poetic it had all seemed yesterday. She had packed away her apartment, submitted her leave of absence from the children's therapy clinic, where she worked, and stepped into love like a woman unafraid. Until 2 hours before the ceremony, her fiancé's mother had walked into the bridal suite with the efficiency of a wrecking ball. "I don't think you understand what this family represents," the woman had said coolly, laying out bank statements, photos of Amara's modest neighborhood, and a casual offer to clear her student debt if she'd leave without causing a scene. A girl from a broken home doesn't become a Whitmore. My son might be naive enough to think otherwise, but I am not. Amara had refused to believe it until she'd walked down the aisle and found a man waiting at the altar who looked more relieved than regretful. "I can't do this," he'd whispered. Not quietly, not gently, not like someone torn between two truths. Just cold. And so she'd run, not to anyone, not away from anything, just away. Now, hours later, her phone dead and her purse left behind in the church's bridal suite, Amara sat with no home to return to and no illusions to cling to. The rain didn't soften. The world around her blurred into streaks of silver and shadow. And then a pair of headlights cut through the storm. A sleek white car slowed at the corner, and Amara turned her face away from its gaze, the movement instinctive. She didn't want anyone to see her like this. Not this broken, not this exposed. The car stopped. A door opened. The sound of polished shoes splashing through puddles reached her ears, deliberate and unfaltering. "Excuse me," a voice said. Low, steady. A timbre of warmth wrapped in something southern and slightly hoarse, like the speaker wasn't used to talking to strangers in the rain. "Are you all right?" Amara didn't look up. She couldn't. Her pride was the only thing keeping her spine straight, the only thing holding her together. "I'm fine," she whispered. The stranger didn't retreat. Instead, he gently eased onto the bench beside her, not too close, but close enough to share the downpour. The scent of leather and rain and something clean cedar and soap settled around her. "Well, Miss Fine," he said, removing his coat and draping it across her shoulders. "You look like you've had a day." She blinked, stunned not just by the gesture, but by the utter lack of condescension in his voice. "Just observation, just kindness." "I don't accept charity," she said, her voice thick with the weariness of someone who had fought her way through too many rooms she didn't belong in. "Good," he replied simply. "Neither do I." She turned then, just slightly drawn by the quiet confidence in his tone. The man beside her was tall, his features angular, but softened by expression. His hair, damp from the storm, curled slightly at his temple. His eyes, pale gray, like the edge of morning, met hers without flinching. "I'm Grant," he said. "Grant Whitaker." Amara didn't respond. Not right away. Something about his name stirred a distant recognition, but her mind was too foggy to place it. "And you?" he asked gently. "Amara." He nodded as if that answered a question he hadn't yet asked. They sat in silence, two strangers cloaked in rain and shared uncertainty. After a moment, he said, "I was driving home when I saw you. For a second, I thought you were a statue, like some kind of haunting tribute to heartbreak." She laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurdly true. Grant looked at her, really looked, and saw more than a drenched wedding dress and smeared makeup. He saw the way her fingers gripped the coat he'd offered. He saw the strength in the way she held her head, even in defeat. I have a daughter, he said suddenly. 8. She's fierce and funny and a little too smart for her own good. Amara raised an eyebrow, and she would tell me not to leave someone alone in the rain, especially someone with eyes like yours. Amara turned away. I'm not a charity case or a story. I never said you were, he replied, then added more softly, but everyone deserves shelter, Amara, even the strong ones, especially the strong ones. The rain continued its rhythm around them. Finally, after a long silence, Amara whispered, I have nowhere to go. Grant stood and extended his hand. Then come with me. Dry off. Make a plan. You can decide what comes next when you're not sitting in a thunderstorm. Amara stared at his hand. Everything in her screamed to run, but something deeper, older whispered, You've been brave long enough. Let someone meet you halfway. She took his hand, and the moment their fingers touched, the storm softened. Just a little. Sometimes the most powerful love stories don't begin with fireworks, but with shelter in the storm. If this moment touched you, don't forget to like this video, drop a comment about your favorite line, and follow the channel for the next chapter of Amara and Grant's journey. Your support helps us keep telling these heartfelt stories that stay with you long after the rain has stopped. 1. The interior of Grant Whitaker's car felt impossibly warm, not because of the heated leather seats or the gentle hum of the engine, but because for the first time in hours, Amara wasn't exposed to the world's judgment. The rain still beat against the windows, but its fury had become a distant thing, muffled by shelter. She sat motionless in the passenger seat, Grant's coat still wrapped tightly around her shoulders. It smelled of rain-soaked pine, a hint of sandalwood, and something steady. She hated how safe it made her feel. She hated even more how she longed for that feeling to last. Grant glanced at her once, then again his fingers tapping the steering wheel, as if weighing the silence. Are you hungry? He asked quietly. Or would you prefer to get out of that dress first? His tone was gentle, no trace of suggestion, no pity. Just a question, plain and sincere. Amara hesitated, the words foreign in her mouth. I don't even know where I am. Victorian District, he said. My place is about 5 minutes from here. Guest house is detached from the main property. Private, no expectations. She turned to look at him. Really look, and for the first time notice the small details. A faint scar just beneath his jawline, the creases at the corners of his eyes that hinted at years spent smiling or frowning. She wasn't sure yet. Why are you doing this, she asked. Grant didn't look away from the road. Because you're soaked freezing and sitting in a wedding dress at a bus stop in a thunderstorm, and because I've been where you are. Amara studied him carefully. Left at the altar. Widowed, he replied after a pause. 3 years ago. The car turned down a narrow tree-lined lane, flanked by wrought iron fencing and Spanish moss swaying like mournful dancers in the wind. I'm sorry, she murmured. Thank you, he said, the words carrying the weight of 1,000 silent acknowledgments. Her name was Charlotte. Complications during surgery. She was gone before I could say goodbye. They didn't speak again until the car pulled into a long circular driveway, where twin brick houses stood like old companions, a main residence, and just beyond a guest house with warm light glowing through lace-curtained windows. Grant Park shut off the engine and turned toward her. You don't have to stay, he said, but I hope you do. You're safe here, I promise. Amara hesitated, then nodded. He led her toward the guest house, his umbrella barely sheltering them both as the rain intensified again. When he opened the door, the soft scent of lavender and wood polish met them. The room inside was cozy, high-beam ceilings, a fireplace crackling quietly in the corner, and a plush armchair next to a bay window that looked out onto a garden still trembling from the storm. A robe and towel had already been laid out on the edge of the chaise lounge, and a steaming teapot waited on a tray as if the space had been expecting her. I had this prepped earlier, Grant said, noticing her glance. I wasn't planning to bring home a stranger. My housekeeper's mother was supposed to visit. She canceled last minute. Lucky timing, I guess. Amara almost smiled, almost. Thank you, she said, her voice soft but sincere. I'll give you some privacy, he said, stepping back into the doorway. Bathroom's through that door. There's soup in the fridge if you want something later. No one else is on the property tonight. She nodded, clutching the coat tighter. Grant, she said before he could leave. He turned. I really didn't plan on anyone seeing me like this. His eyes softened. Sometimes the only way to be seen is when you've got nothing left to hide. He left without another word. Later, wrapped in the thick robe and sipping tea with trembling fingers, Amara stood by the window and watched the storm wander across the marshes beyond the property. The trees bowed in reverence to the wind, and the sky burned violet and gray with fury. Her reflection in the glass startled her. Gone was the woman she'd practiced becoming for her wedding hair, coiled in perfection, skin dewy, and glowing lips painted like a promise. What stared back now was the raw version, the woman who had lost everything but hadn't shattered. And somehow that made her feel stronger. She wandered the room, touching the carved edges of furniture, noting the delicate scent of old books and rose oil. There were paintings on the walls, watercolors of tide pools, a sun-drenched dock, an egret in flight. A small bookshelf held titles worn with love poetry, Southern memoirs, children's books. One photo sat framed on the mantel, a woman with dark hair laughing at the camera, a small girl clutched to her chest. The girl's wide eyes mirrored the man who had picked her up off the curb, Charlotte and Elise. Amara touched the frame reverently. She's beautiful, she whispered. The room whispered nothing back. She had just settled into the armchair with the tea when a gentle knock sounded at the door. Grant stepped in without waiting for an answer. He held out a small plate with 2 thick slices of banana bread. My daughter's favorite, he said. The housekeeper made it this morning. Thank you. He stood in the doorway, awkward for the first time. I know I'm a stranger, he said, but if you ever want to talk, sometimes it helps. Amara looked up. Her voice came slower, this time more certain. Do you always offer your guest house to strangers in wedding dresses? No, he said. Only to the ones brave enough to sit in the rain and not disappear. She met his gaze then. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Amara smiled, this time fully, and the man in the rain smiled back. The storm outside continued its symphony, but inside the guest house a silence bloomed. Not empty, not awkward, but the kind that holds space for something yet unnamed. Whatever had begun at the bus stop had not ended in the driveway. Something else had arrived, quiet and steady as the tide lapping at their feet. Something not yet love, but maybe the beginning of grace. Artitomon etim. Amara woke to the scent of jasmine and linen. Morning light poured through the tall antique windows of the guest house, slipping between sheer curtains and brushing over the pale comforter like a tender hand. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Only the warmth of the bed, the softness of the robe still wrapped around her frame, and the faint echo of storm water dripping from the eaves. Then it returned like the quiet ache of a healed wound touched too soon. The wedding, the church, the shame, the way she'd stood there under stained glass clutching her bouquet like it was a lifeline, and how the man she was meant to marry had looked at her as though she were an obligation he couldn't carry. But that wasn't where her thoughts settled this morning. Instead, they lingered on the man in the rain. Grant Whitaker. She whispered the name aloud to test it against the silence. It sounded sturdy like old oak or riverstone, unfamiliar yet unthreatening, the kind of name that didn't vanish in a storm. She rose slowly, still sore in places she hadn't noticed the night before, tired more from emotion than anything else. Her wedding dress, still draped across the valet chair, had dried into a wrinkled ghost. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, she dressed in one of the soft loungewear sets Grant had thoughtfully left folded at the end of the bed, a charcoal gray tunic and matching pants. They were a little long in the legs and a little loose in the sleeves, but she felt oddly comforted by the borrowed fabric, like she was wearing invisibility or armor or both. When she stepped into the kitchen, she found a note folded neatly beside the kettle. Amara. I had to run Elise to school. There's coffee in the French press, fresh berries in the fridge, and oatmeal on the stove. Housekeeper's doing, not mine. I burned toast. Take today. No expectations, No questions. Gee, she read it twice, not for content, but for the tone. He hadn't signed his full name, and he hadn't offered pity. Just space. It undid her more than sympathy ever could have. She poured herself coffee and took it to the small dining nook overlooking the back garden. The storm had scrubbed the world clean. Ivy glistened on the trellises, and a bluebird flitted between the branches of a peach tree. The guest house had a wraparound porch, and beyond it, the yard opened toward a reflecting pond ringed with mossy stone. It looked like something from a childhood dream, a secret place tucked between grief and rebirth. She had never known such peace, and it terrified her. Because it wasn't hers. None of this was. It belonged to the man who'd picked her out of the storm like a stray, with no motive beyond kindness. She didn't know what to make of that. In her world, favors came with strings, or expectations, or whispered judgments. But Grant had offered her a place to breathe, without asking for air in return. She took another sip of coffee, wincing slightly. It was strong, not bitter but assertive, like the man himself. Later that morning, while folding the robe and setting it aside, she noticed a faint chime and looked toward the front door. Grant stood on the porch, dressed in a navy sport coat, sleeves rolled, a paper bag in one hand, and something else more uncertain in his eyes. She opened the door before he could knock. "Hi," he said with a lopsided smile. "Didn't want to intrude. I brought muffins, and maybe a truce between coffee cultures." Amara raised an eyebrow. "There's cream and sugar this time," he added. She let him in, more amused than she wanted to be. They sat at the breakfast table, passing slices of lemon poppy seed and warm cinnamon through a silence that felt less like avoidance and more like reverence. "I hope it wasn't too much," Grant said after a while. "Leaving the note, I didn't want to hover." "You didn't," she said simply. "You gave me something I didn't realize I needed." He looked up. "What's that?" "A morning without expectation." He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than she was willing to say. Then he shifted in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. "I don't usually do this," he said. "I'm not in the habit of inviting strangers into my life, especially not like this." Amara stiffened. "If this is the part where you ask me to leave—" "No," he interrupted gently. "No, nothing like that. I just want to make sure you're okay." She blinked. "Why?" she asked. His gaze didn't waver. "Because 3 years ago, I lost my wife to something I couldn't fix. And I know what it feels like to wake up one morning and find that everything you believed in no longer wants you back." The words hit her chest like a quiet bell tolling in the distance. "Charlotte," she said, remembering. He nodded. She was everything warm. Elise was 5 when it happened. "I've been trying to keep the world upright ever since." "You seem like you've done a good job," Amara said quietly. "I pretend well." That made her smile faint and real. "I'm not asking you to talk," Grant continued, softer now. "But if there's ever a moment when you want someone to listen, without fixing, without judgment, I can be that." She stared at her hands, then looked up at him. "It wasn't just the wedding," she said finally. "It was everything that led to it. I thought love was about becoming what someone needed, and I forgot how to be what I am." Grant exhaled slow and long, as if something in her words unraveled a knot in his own chest. "I know that feeling," he said. "Too well." They sat there a while longer, two people who had both been broken in ways the world never sees from the outside. Neither of them tried to rush the moment. There was a grace and stillness in breathing the same quiet. Eventually, Grant stood, brushing crumbs from his sleeve. "Elise is with my sister tonight," he said. "If you need anything, I'm just across the path." Amara walked him to the door. Before he left, he turned back. "You may not feel like it right now," he said, "but you walked out of something that didn't deserve you. That takes strength, not shame." Amara didn't know how to answer that. So she didn't. She closed the door slowly, stood for a moment with her hand on the knob, and then turned back toward the quiet sanctuary behind her. The guest house, once a stranger's shelter, now felt like something else entirely. A waiting place, a space between endings and beginnings, a breath held in the body of a woman who wasn't finished becoming. Mersomun. It was the soft, rhythmic sound of sneakers on polished wood that told Amara she was no longer alone. She had been standing at the edge of the garden path, where the brick from the guest house gave way to low grass and clustered azaleas. The morning had unfolded gently, thick clouds drifting like lace across the sky, cicadas humming in lazy intervals. It was a kind of quiet only the South knew, not silent, but slow, soaked in stillness and old songs. Amara turned, brushing her hands clean from pruning the lavender patch. There, standing at the far end of the porch steps, was a girl, slim-shouldered, light brown hair in a high ponytail, a red backpack slung over one side. Not quite scowling, not quite smiling. Suspicious, watchful, wary. "Hi," Amara offered. The girl didn't respond immediately. Her eyes, gray like her father's, swept over Amara's face, her hands, her shoes. She took in everything in a single practiced glance. "You're the lady from the storm," she said at last. Amara straightened. "I suppose I am." The girl walked a little closer, stopping just before the brick path. "I'm Elise. I live here." Amara softened. "I'm Amara." There was a beat of silence between them, thin as tissue and just as delicate. "Are you staying long?" Elise asked, arms folded. Amara hesitated. "I don't know yet." Elise nodded slowly, as if that was the only acceptable answer. "Dad said you needed a place to rest. He's very kind. He doesn't usually bring people home," the girl said, matter of fact. Amara offered a small smile. "I figured." Elise stepped forward then boldly and stared up at her. She wasn't aggressive, not quite, but there was a gravity in her gaze that belied her age, something older, more measured, like a soul that had learned too young not to trust easily. "Do you like kids?" Elise asked. Amara blinked at the abruptness. "Very much." "Do you like talking to them like they're real people, or do you use the voice?" "The voice. You know, the aw, sweetie, that's so cute voice." Amara laughed. "Definitely not the voice." That seemed to win her a few points. Elise squinted slightly. "What do you do?" "I'm a pediatric physical therapist." "Oh," Elise tilted her head. "So you help kids walk and stuff?" "Yes. Sometimes it's walking. Sometimes it's learning to move their arms again after surgery, or helping them build strength after a long hospital stay." "Cool," Elise said. "I broke my arm once, fell off the swing. Dad nearly fainted." "I bet." Another pause. Then Elise stepped forward and extended her hand with surprising formality. "You can stay," she said. Amara accepted the handshake, suppressing a smile. "Thanks for the permission." "Don't make it weird," Elise replied before turning and skipping up the porch stairs. Amara stood there for a moment, the warmth of the handshake still ghosting in her palm. A test had been administered, and she had passed. Later that day, Amara sat on the guest house porch, thumbing through a gardening book she had found on the bookshelf. She liked the feel of it in her hands, pages that smelled of dust and memory spines softened from years of being opened and read in the same quiet sunlight. Elise reappeared after lunch, dragging a small chalkboard under one arm and a box of art supplies under the other. "I'm doing a presentation for school," she said simply, as if they were already old friends. "On monarch butterflies." Amara set her book aside. "That sounds wonderful." "You can help me paint the wings," Elise said without looking up. "But only if you stay inside the lines." It became their ritual over the next few days. Mornings were quiet, slow-paced, and filled with small discoveries, fresh muffins left on the steps by Grant's housekeeper birds nesting in the ivy, a squirrel who had no fear of humans. Elise appeared each afternoon with some new mission, a leaf-collecting project, a dog-eared book she wanted, read aloud a debate about which flowers bees like best. And each time Amara met her with patience. Not exaggerated enthusiasm, not overdone sweetness, just truth. When Elise asked about hospitals, Amara told her. When Elise asked why she wasn't married, Amara told her the version a child could hold. And Elise slowly but surely allowed the walls around her to thin. One evening, as the sun folded itself into the horizon, casting the sky in watercolor blush and gold, Amara sat with Elise under the trellis. The little girl was painting butterflies onto cardboard wings, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I used to dream about my mom," Elise said, suddenly not looking up. "After she died." Amara didn't respond right away. "Do you still?" she asked gently. "Not as much, but sometimes when I see something yellow, I think of her." Amara nodded, heart heavy with the wisdom children aren't meant to carry. "She likes sunflowers," Elise continued. "And cinnamon tea. She used to dance in the kitchen when nobody was looking." "She sounds amazing," Amara said softly. "She was. Elise set down her brush, then turned toward her. Do you believe in signs, she asked. I think sometimes the people we love find ways to remind us they're still with us. Elise seemed to accept that. She stood dusted off her knees and announced, you can help me with my speech tomorrow. I'd be honored. And with that, she trotted back toward the main house, trailing orange paint on her elbow and unspoken hope in her wake. That night, as Amara returned to the quiet comfort of the guest house, she paused on the porch. The stars had emerged like pearls across a velvet sky. The air smelled of jasmine and earth, and the pond beyond the garden shimmered with reflected moonlight. She thought of Elise's questions, and how children, without realizing it, often cut to the heart of what matters. Trust wasn't something you asked for. It was something you earned in tiny, fragile pieces, one moment at a time. Amara had arrived as a stranger in a storm, but now in the eyes of a little girl with paint-streaked hands and grief-worn edges, she was something else entirely. She was someone who had stayed. The clock had just slipped past midnight when the knock came. Soft at first, a hesitant tapping like rain against a window. Then a pause long enough to make Amara question whether she had imagined it. She sat up slowly, brushing the edge of the blanket from her shoulders. Outside, the world held its breath. The garden was hushed under moonlight, silvering the leaves and casting the porch in gentle shadow. Somewhere far off, a train hummed along the edge of the horizon. The air was still, but something in her chest stirred, an old instinct from years spent calming, frightened children sensing distress even before it was spoken aloud. Then it came again. Not the knock this time, a whimper. Amara crossed the floor without thinking, her bare feet silent on the wooden boards. She opened the guest house door to find Elise standing there. No coat, no shoes, just a faded cotton nightgown, and eyes wide with fear. Elise, the girl didn't answer. Her lip trembled as she looked up. Her hair was tousled, her hands clasped tightly in front of her fingers, twisting themselves in silent panic. Amara crouched to meet her gaze. What's wrong, sweetheart? Elise swallowed. I had the dream again. Amara softened. Come in. She took the girl's hand, ice cold and clammy, and led her to the warmth of the guest house living room. The fire had burned down to soft embers, casting flickering light across the rugs and shelves. Amara wrapped a throw blanket around Elise's shoulders, guiding her gently onto the couch. Want to tell me about it? The girl's voice was barely above a whisper. It was the accident. Amara stilled. She didn't ask what accident. She already knew. Elise pulled her knees up to her chest and buried her face in them. It always starts the same. We're driving. It's raining, but not like a storm. Just enough to blur the lights. Mom is singing. She's laughing at something. I can't remember what it was, but I know it made her happy. Her words broke apart, a pause, woven with breath. Then the truck comes. I never see it, just the noise. Like glass and metal and screaming, but all muffled, like it's underwater. Amara placed a hand gently on her back, steady and warm. I scream and scream, but she doesn't answer. And then I wake up and I can't breathe. Elise looked up at her cheeks streaked with tears. I don't want to forget her voice, she said, but I think I am. The ache that unfurled in Amara's chest was quiet but profound. She knew that pain. Not precisely, but closely enough to feel it in her marrow. That helpless longing to hold on to something fading. A voice, a scent, a smile that once lit a room, but now lived only in memory. She reached for a glass of water and handed it to Elise. Grief is like waves, she said gently. Sometimes it's gentle, brushing your ankles. Sometimes it knocks you off your feet without warning. But it doesn't mean you're drowning. It means you love someone so deeply your heart hasn't figured out how to beat without them yet. Elise blinked slowly. Her breath began to steady. Did you ever lose someone, she asked? Amara hesitated, then nodded. My mother, she said. When I was 12. She had a laugh that could peel the paint off the walls. She wore purple lipstick that never matched anything she owned. But she made the best sweet tea in Georgia. Elise smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth trembling. Do you still hear her sometimes, she asked. Not always, Amara admitted. But there are days, quiet days, when I swear I catch her voice in the wind, or smell her perfume when no one else is around. It's not the same as having her here, but it reminds me that love doesn't leave us. It just changes shape. She pulled the girl gently into her arms and Elise didn't resist. She folded into Amara like she'd been waiting to be held this way for a very long time. They sat like that for several minutes, no need for words, just the hum of comfort passing from one heart to another. Eventually, Elise's breathing evened. Her body relaxed. "Can I stay here tonight?" she asked sleepily. Amara nodded. "Of course." She set up the couch with extra blankets and tucked her in, smoothing Elise's hair back from her damp forehead. As she dimmed the lamp and turned to leave, Elise's voice caught her one last time. "Do you think she'd like you?" she whispered. Amara paused in the doorway. "Who?" "My mom." She turned back, eyes glistening. "I don't know," Amara said honestly, "but I hope she'd see how much I care about you." Elise nodded once very slowly. "She would," she murmured. And then she closed her eyes and drifted into sleep, no nightmares this time. Only the steady rise and fall of her chest as the moon moved through the window pane. Later that night, long after the fire had gone out, Amara sat on the porch in silence, watching the pond reflect the constellations above. Her heart was full and heavy all at once. The guest house no longer felt like a place of pause. It had become something living, something breathing, a threshold between past and future sorrow and healing. Elise had crossed that threshold tonight, and in doing so she had drawn Amara further in. Not just into her world, but into the heart of something far more fragile. A family learning how to begin again. And Amara, once a stranger in the rain, now carried their trust like a sacred flame. The suitcase sat by the door like an unwanted guest. Its zipper was slightly crooked, and one handle hung limp, as if it too questioned the decision. The bag held only what Amara had borrowed: folded loungewear, a clean blouse Grant had left out, with a polite note, a borrowed sweater that still held the scent of cedar, and something she hadn't named yet. It was time to go. At least that's what she kept telling herself. The days had slipped by, gentle as drifting petals. Mornings filled with bird song and the scent of toast from the main house. Afternoons spent in the garden or reading under the shade tree, while Elise painted her version of the world in loud, unapologetic colors. Evenings that began with small dinners and ended in conversations on the porch, sometimes with Grant, sometimes just with the stars. But it wasn't her world, and it wasn't her place. She had always been good at knowing when to leave. Too good. So before the morning light could tempt her again, before the smell of brewing coffee or the sound of Elise's bare feet on the porch stairs could soften her resolve, Amara reached for the suitcase and took a breath that felt too loud in the stillness of the guest house. Grant was in the kitchen when she knocked. He answered with a dish towel in hand and a look in his eyes that said he already knew. "You're leaving," he said quietly. "I should," she replied, her voice calm but fragile. "I've been here longer than I planned. It's time." He stepped aside, allowing her in. The kitchen was bright with morning light, soft jazz humming low on a radio near the windowsill. A plate of toast sat untouched on the counter. "Elise will be disappointed," he said. "I'll talk to her," Amara offered. "Explain it's not goodbye, just time to move forward." Grant nodded slowly, but the silence between them thickened. "You know," he said, pouring 2 cups of coffee and sliding one across the counter to her, "you came here out of a storm. I thought maybe you'd stay until the skies cleared. But I didn't expect—" He trailed off. "Didn't expect what?" she asked gently. He met her gaze. "That I'd get used to your quiet, or Elise's laughter coming from the guest house, or finding a second cup needed in the mornings." Amara swallowed hard. "You made it easy to forget the world outside." "It's still out there," he said. "But that doesn't mean you have to walk into it alone." She looked away. "Grant, I've built my whole life by learning how to stand on my own. Depending on someone, it hasn't gone well for me." "I'm not asking you to depend on me," he said, softer now. "I'm asking if you want to share a stretch of road, even if it's only a short one." It would have been easier if he had asked her to stay outright, if he had pressed his hand over hers and begged, if he had used grand gestures or made promises he couldn't keep. But this offering of space and sincerity was more dangerous than anything, because it felt real. And real had always been what hurt the most. She looked down at her coffee, then back at him. "I'll speak to Elise," she said again, and this time the words came more like an apology. Elise was in the garden, her knees muddy, Her cheeks flushed with the glow of a child who had not yet learned to expect endings. She looked up grinning. "Did you see the butterflies are back?" Amara forced a smile. "I did. They're beautiful. I named one after you. The one with the little nick in her wing. She's still fast, though." "Elise?" Amara sat on the bench, her voice careful. "I need to go for a little while." The girl stilled. "Why?" "Because sometimes we have to move forward," Amara said gently. "Even when it's hard." "But you said we weren't saying goodbye." "I'm not," she said quickly. "This isn't goodbye. It's just, see you later." Elise looked at her, those gray eyes, a mirror of Grant's holding so much more than a child should. "Are you coming back?" she asked. Amara hesitated, and Elise, with that strange, preternatural intuition she possessed, nodded to herself. "It's okay," she said. "I get it. People leave." The words pierced like needles. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Truth uttered without bitterness, just quiet resignation. Amara reached for her hand. "I don't want to be one of those people." Elise looked at her. "Then don't." The car was packed by afternoon. Grant stood at the foot of the drive, arms crossed, watching the sun dip lower behind the trees. Amara approached, suitcase in hand. She paused before him, the wind tugging strands of hair across her cheek. "Thank you," she said. "For everything. For letting me land here, even if only for a while." He nodded. "You brought something with you, something we didn't realize we were missing." "I needed to breathe. You gave me that." They stood in the hush of that moment, both knowing there was more to be said, but neither ready to say it. Then Grant reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "Elise made this." Amara opened it. It was a child's drawing, three figures under a blue sky, Elise in the middle, Grant on the left, and Amara on the right. They were holding hands beneath a tree with yellow butterflies circling above. At the bottom, in blocky, uneven letters, were the words, "Not everyone leaves." Amara's throat tightened. She tucked the note into her coat pocket and nodded. "Tell her I'll see her again." "I will." She opened the car door, 1 foot already inside. Grant stepped forward just once, then stopped himself. But she saw it, the way his hands curled, the way his chest lifted, as if preparing to speak a truth he wasn't sure she was ready to hear. So she said it for him. "I'll come back," she whispered. Then she slid behind the wheel, shut the door, and drove. Neither of them waved. They didn't need to, because despite the miles she would travel, despite the silence of roads and the distance of time, both of them knew this goodbye wasn't the end. It was only the pause before the turning back. It had been 3 weeks since Amara drove away from the guest house, and yet the scent of jasmine still lingered in her dreams. She had returned to the small apartment she rented just outside Atlanta, a neat, forgettable space with gray walls and a balcony that overlooked the back of a laundromat. It was the kind of place where time stood still, where no one asked questions and everything was built for practicality, not comfort. And for a while, that was exactly what she needed. Structure, silence, no surprises. Each morning she rose before the sun laced her sneakers with mechanical precision and ran along the sidewalks that flanked tired strip malls and cracked parking lots. She returned to work, to the soft hum of therapy rooms and the familiar click of crutches against tile. Children laughed, cried, and reached for her hands as they always had. But something had shifted. She moved through her days like a woman inside a glass shell, watching, feeling, but at a distance. She still smiled, still offered warmth, but her laughter came slower and her silences stretched longer, because a part of her had stayed behind. In the quiet of the guest house, in the light of Grant's eyes, in the steady, surprising love of a child who had dared to ask, "Do you think she'd like you?" The letter arrived on a Wednesday. She found it tucked among bills and junk mail, addressed in tight, careful script. No return address. She knew the handwriting. Her fingers trembled only slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. "Dear Amara, Elise asked me to write this because, in her words, grown-ups are bad at saying what they mean. She's not wrong. We've missed you. Not in the dramatic way people say when they miss something for comfort. We've missed you in the quiet ways. The empty seat at the porch table, the second cup of coffee no one reaches for, the way the wind moves through the garden when no one's there to tell it to hush." Elise painted another butterfly last night. This one she named Maybe. I asked her why. She said because maybe means she's coming back. "I don't know what your life looks like now. I don't know what you're ready for, but I do know this. There's a position opening at Elise's school temporary leave replacement for their therapy coordinator. It's part-time, flexible, local. I spoke with the principal. She's willing to consider someone with your background, even though it's not a hospital setting. I'm not offering this out of charity, Amara. I'm offering it because when you were here, things settled. Not just for Elise, for me, for this house that's held too much stillness. If your answer is no, I'll understand. But if your answer is maybe well, then there's still time. Always Grant. Amara sat with the letter for a long time. Outside her window, traffic passed without rhythm. A man shouted into a phone 2 floors down. Somewhere a dog barked at nothing. And still the only sound she could hear was her own heartbeat. She folded the letter carefully and set it on the windowsill. It stayed there all night, catching the glow of the street lamp like a quiet question. By Friday, she had called the number he'd written at the bottom of the page. Just once. Just to ask about the position, not about him, not yet. The principal, Ms. Holloway, was brisk but kind. Grant spoke highly of you, she said. Said you had a gift with children who don't speak through words. I try to listen, Amara replied. That's more than most. The interview was informal. Virtual. She wore a soft blouse and pulled her braids into a knot. Her voice held steady, though her palms were damp. They spoke about experienced philosophies of healing and the difference between clinical therapy and emotional presence. I'm not looking for someone to fix every child, Ms. Holloway said. Just someone who notices the ones no one sees. I can do that, Amara said. And she meant it. It was a Tuesday when she returned. She took the long way, winding through sleepy 2-lane roads lined with cypress and wild hydrangea. Summer was thinning at the edges, and golden leaves had begun to collect along the ditches like confetti from a parade that had already passed. The town looked the same. The bakery with the peeling sign, the bookstore that never updated its window display, the street lamp that leaned slightly too far left. But the moment she turned onto the long drive leading to the Whitaker home, her breath caught. The house stood serene beneath a sky streaked with lavender dusk. The porch lights were already on, glowing like an invitation. And there, just beyond the garden gate, stood Elise, barefoot, chalk dust on her hands, a giant sunflower painted across her t-shirt. She spotted the car and lit up like sunrise. Amara hadn't even stepped out before the girl launched forward, arms flung wide. You came back. Amara knelt as Elise barreled into her, nearly knocking her off balance. I told Daddy you weren't done yet, Elise whispered against her neck. I told him maybe he wasn't a no. Grant appeared then, slower, more composed, but his eyes said more than words could reach. Amara rose to meet him. You got the letter, he said. She nodded. And the offer. He studied her face, cautious. So is this a visit, or? Amara exhaled softly. It's a maybe, which according to Elise is a pretty big yes. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly, Grant stepped forward and offered her his hand, not as a declaration, not as a plea. Just a gesture, a beginning. She took it. And in the waning light, surrounded by painted butterflies and half-bloomed sunflowers, Amara realized something. There are some places you don't return to. There are places that wait for you. And when you finally say yes, the door opens, not as an entrance, but as a welcome home. The guest house welcomed her like a familiar embrace. Pillows still fluffed lavender, still drying from the beams, and the worn novel she'd started weeks ago resting on the nightstand untouched. Everything was as she left it, and yet nothing felt the same, because she was no longer the same. Amara had returned not as a woman fleeing a storm, but as one walking straight into the eye of her own history, with eyes open, spine tall, and a heart that still beat a little too fast when she heard Elise laugh or caught Grant watching her in quiet reverie. But healing was not linear, and peace, as she would learn, had shadows of its own. It began with a laugh, or rather the echo of one. She had just finished organizing the therapy room at Elise's school, prepping sensory tools and filing intake reports, when a sound drifted in from the hallway, bright girlish giggling, followed by a deeper chuckle that stopped Amara mid-motion. Grant! He was there for a PTA meeting, Elise had told her earlier. But what Amara hadn't expected was her, the woman beside him, Blonde, tall, flawlessly tailored in a sand-colored suit and pumps that didn't dare scuff. She leaned in close, too close, brushing imaginary lint from Grant's lapel, with the intimacy of someone who had done it before. Amara wasn't a jealous woman. At least she hadn't been in a long time. But the twist in her stomach wasn't from insecurity, it was from memory. Memories of being replaced, of being told you're too much or worse, not enough. Of once standing at the altar while her fiancé texted another woman from the groom's room. She turned away too quickly, knocking a basket of therapy bands to the floor. Her hands trembled as she gathered them. Later that night, Grant found her on the porch, her shoulders stiff beneath the evening sky. "You left the school in a rush," he said carefully. "I had a headache," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "Elise said you didn't even say goodbye." "That happens sometimes." The words fell flat between them. Grant stepped forward, cautious. "She's a family friend. Lana, her daughter's in Elise's class." Amara folded her arms. "You don't owe me an explanation." "I know, but I want to give one." She glanced up, something hard glinting behind her usually warm gaze. "That's the thing, Grant. I don't know where we stand. One moment I'm a guest, then a therapist now, maybe something more. But I'm still afraid to ask." "Ask what?" "If this us is real, or just a kindness that's stretched too far." Grant's jaw tightened. "You think I offer kindness like a leash?" "I think I've been someone's project before," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I've been pitied, cared for, never chosen." He moved closer, frustration flickering under his calm exterior. "You think I let Elise draw pictures of you because of pity, that I wanted you here because I needed someone to fill space. I don't know what to think, Grant. You're safe. You're so safe, and that terrifies me." They stood in silence. Then Grant said quietly, "You keep expecting me to leave, or let you go. But what if I'm not going anywhere?" Amara looked down. Her hands were clenched at her sides. "You don't understand," she whispered. "The man I was supposed to marry said he loved me, but every time I cried, he told me I was weak. Every time I succeeded, he reminded me to stay humble. He said I was lucky someone like him wanted me." Grant's expression changed, not to anger, but to something deeper. Pain for her. A quiet kind of fury on her behalf. "Then he never saw you," he said. "But I do." She shook her head. "You don't even know all of me yet." "I want to." His voice was firm now, unshakable. "I want to know the parts you hide, the things that make you run, the fears that still wake you up at night. I don't want perfect, Amara. I want real." A long silence fell. Then gently he reached for her hand. Not to pull, not to possess, just to hold. Amara let herself lean just slightly, enough for their shoulders to touch. Not a surrender, but a beginning. That night she dreamt. Not of storms, not of the man who had once left her trembling in white lace and silence. She dreamt of being held, not rescued, not saved, just seen. And for the first time in years, when she woke, she didn't reach for armor. She reached for the light. The Mewanam. The invitation came in the form of a sticky note stuck to a Tupperware lid on the guest house porch. "Family dinner, 6 p.m. Bring your appetite and your honesty. G." Amara stared at it for a long moment. The handwriting was unmistakably Grant's, slanted, strong, but careful, the kind of script that hinted at a man who rarely rushed even in his thoughts. She traced her thumb over the words "family dinner" and felt her stomach twist in a way that had nothing to do with food. At 5:45, Amara stood before the mirror. Her reflection looked almost unfamiliar. A soft emerald blouse, dark slacks, and delicate earrings that had once belonged to her mother. She had braided her hair low and neat, taming the curls that always rebelled in humid air. A subtle gloss on her lips. Nothing overdone. And yet she hesitated. She wasn't nervous about Elise, sweet, open-hearted Elise, who'd already claimed her in drawings and butterflies and bedtime whispers. It was the ghosts. Not hers this time. His. The Whitaker house carried them like wallpaper, thin, invisible, and permanent. His late wife's favorite china in the glass cabinet. A child's painting still framed in the hallway, signed in a scrawl that predated grief. Even the scent in the foyer, a soft rose. And something deeper spoke of a woman who had once moved through these rooms, barefoot, humming lullabies to no one. Amara had never been afraid of the dead, but she had learned to fear the spaces they left behind. Grant opened the door before she could knock. He looked handsome in a navy sweater sleeves pushed up the silver at his temples, catching the porch light. "You came," he said with a smile that didn't mask the hint of nerves in his eyes. "You asked." He stepped back to let her in. Elise set the table. She's very proud. The dining room was warm candlelit and already filled with the gentle clatter of silverware and the scent of baked rosemary chicken. A vase of sunflowers, likely Elise's choice, sat in the center, vibrant and unpretentious. And there at the table was Elise proudly arranging folded napkins. "Ta-da!" she said, throwing her arms out. "Fancy, right?" "Very," Amara smiled, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "Are those my napkin folds?" "I improved them." Dinner began with laughter. Elise chattered about school, her science project, her new friend Layla, the teacher who wore shoes that squeaked like mice. Grant watched them both with the quiet attention of a man memorizing something he feared might disappear. And Amara for a while allowed herself to believe this could be ordinary. But then Elise left to grab a drawing she wanted to show Amara, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was full, tense. "Amara," Grant said, his voice lower now. "There's something I want to say." She looked at him steady. "I'm listening." "This house," he began, eyes flickering to the hallway, "was built for a different version of my life. One I thought would last forever." She nodded. "I loved Anna," he said. "God, I did. And losing her, it was like watching the sun fall from the sky." His voice wavered just once. "But you," he continued, eyes meeting hers now raw and unguarded. "You don't replace her. You're not a second chapter or a footnote. You're your own story, and I want to read it. With you." Amara's throat tightened. She had come prepared for ghosts, but not for this living man with open palms and a heart that still believed it could hold more. She reached across the table, taking his hand. "I'm not afraid of her," she said, "or your love for her. I just don't want to walk into a room and feel like I'll always be compared to someone I can never be." Grant's voice softened. "Then let me be clear, I'm not asking you to be her. I'm asking you to be you. And if we're careful, kind, and honest, maybe this house can hold all of it. All of us." Just then, Elise bounded back into the room, holding a drawing above her head. "I made this." She slid it between them with the triumphant flourish of an artist unveiling her masterpiece. 3 figures stood hand in hand again, this time in front of the dinner table. A 4th figure hovered above, drawn as a golden outline, with stars in her dress and flowers in her hair. "That's Mommy," Elise whispered, tapping the starry figure. Amara looked at Grant. He was silent, eyes shining, nodding slowly. "I told her," Elise continued, "that we still love her. But we have room now, room for more." Amara felt tears sting her eyes, but they didn't fall. Instead, she smiled. She reached out, resting her hand gently over the drawn figures. "Yes," she said softly, "there's room." Later that evening, as dishes were cleared and Elise slept soundly upstairs, Amara lingered in the kitchen with Grant. The house had quieted, the kind of stillness that follows not absence, but peace. He walked her to the door. "I'm not rushing you," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I'm here when you're ready." Amara leaned in. For the first time, she placed a kiss just beside his mouth, a promise left unfinished, not because of doubt, but because some things deserve to grow slowly, like gardens after frost, or hearts after loss. She stepped into the night, the stars bright above her, and for the first time in years, the air did not feel haunted. It felt like home. Sapinwurnemerum. The storm that arrived that weekend wasn't the kind that battered rooftops or flooded garden paths. It was quieter, colder, and came wearing pearls. Vivian Whitaker, Grant's mother, descended upon the house with the silent force of a matriarch who had seen empires rise and fall and considered both events mildly inconvenient. Her town car pulled into the gravel drive with an elegance that didn't quite match the chattering birds or the disheveled sunflowers still leaning wild in the garden. The driver opened the door, and out she stepped, tall, despite her age hair. A soft halo of perfectly styled silver lips, pursed as though already halfway through an unsaid critique. Elise spotted her first. "Grandma." She darted down the steps and was immediately caught in a gentle, firm embrace. Vivian held her with affection, but it was the kind of affection that didn't bend loving, but measured. Always measured. Grant emerged next, his smile courteous but tight. "Mother." "Darling." She kissed both his cheeks like a diplomat arriving at a tense summit. You look tired. And you look exactly the same. I've survived another season of garden parties and charity galas, she replied, removing her gloves one finger at a time. Apparently that keeps one preserved. Her eyes swept the porch, then the guest house, then back to Grant. I see things have changed. Grant stiffened almost imperceptibly. Some things, yes. She smiled thinly. Then I suppose it's time I got properly reacquainted. Amara had not prepared for this. She knew Vivian was coming. Grant had mentioned it briefly, as one might mention the potential for light rain, something to note, not to fear. But nothing in his voice had hinted at the complex cutting presence that now stood in the center of his home, sipping tea from china that matched her earrings. Vivian regarded Amara as one might regard a priceless painting hung slightly askew, with interest, with calculation. With a flicker of doubt she didn't bother hiding. So she said, after Elise had been sent off to read, "You're the one living in my daughter-in-law's guest house." There was no hostility in her voice, but no warmth either. Amara smiled politely. It's kind of Grant to offer me a place while I transition into the school role. Vivian's eyes didn't blink. Kindness is dangerous when it lacks caution. Mother Grant interjected, tone sharper. Vivian held up a hand. I mean no offense, I'm simply a woman who values clarity. Amara nodded, her voice calm. Then let me be clear too. I'm not here to fill anyone's shoes. I have too much respect for the woman who came before me and for myself. For the first time, Vivian blinked. Grant looked at Amara with something close to awe. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't postured, but her truth had rung like a bell. Vivian sat back in her chair, folding her hands. And what is it you want, Miss Fields? Amara looked her in the eye. A life that isn't borrowed. A love that isn't conditional. A place where I'm not a guest in someone else's story. The silence that followed was deep. Not angry, just still, like the moment before a verdict. Then slowly, Vivian reached for her tea again. My husband once told me, she said, that the strongest women are the ones who refuse to beg to be understood. She sipped delicately. I see you are strong, Ms. Fields. I'll adjust my expectations accordingly. Later that evening, after Vivian had retreated to the guest room, she once called hers Grant, found Amara standing alone by the garden, the moonlight glancing off her cheekbones. He approached carefully. She's not an easy woman. No, Amara replied, but she loves you and Elise. She also loved Anna. I know. He watched her for a moment. You didn't flinch, not once. Amara looked up at him, her eyes warm, despite the weariness in them. I've been underestimated before. It doesn't scare me anymore. Grant smiled softly. She'll come around. I'm not here to win her, just to be seen. He touched her cheek, then thumb, brushing just beneath her eye. I see you. The words were simple, but in the hush of the night they rooted something deeper. Not reassurance, recognition. The next morning, Amara found a note tucked beside her cup in the kitchen. The roses by the east fence are overgrown. If you're to stay, you might as well help tame them. V. No signature, no warmth, but also no exclusion. Amara folded the note and smiled. It wasn't approval, but it was the beginning of one. Dear Gwenanum, there are towns where time forgets to move quickly, where the hair salon doubles as the center of intelligence, and where a single new face can turn a Tuesday afternoon into a full-fledged event. And in Willow Creek, Amara had officially become the event. The first whisper came at the farmer's market. She was reaching for a jar of clover honey when two women near the jam stand tilted their heads in synchronized curiosity. That's the one staying in the old Whitaker guest house, isn't it? She's the therapist at the school. She's not from here. As if that answered everything. Amara smiled politely and moved on, honey in hand, but the hum trailed behind her like a loose ribbon in the wind. She was no stranger to whispers. She had grown up in towns like this, slow-paced, tight-laced, where memory ran longer than the river, and judgment traveled faster than light. But that didn't mean it didn't sting, especially when the rumors weren't about her exactly, but about them. Grant Whitaker, the widower who kept to himself for years, raising a daughter so tender and wise the townsfolk called her a miracle child. And now her, the woman who'd arrived in the rain and stayed long enough to rearrange the house's quiet. The barbs were subtle at first. A misdirected comment at the diner, an awkward pause at school pickup. One teacher who referred to her as Miss Fields, the temporary staff member. Temporary, always that word. As if she had no business planting roots where someone else had once bloomed. It was on a Friday afternoon with Elise humming in the back seat and the sun riding low over the hills that Amara pulled into the parking lot of Whitaker's General, a dusty old shop that sold everything from feed to fleece-lined flannels. And there stood Lana Walsh, blonde poised spine as straight as a yardstick, widow of the town's sheriff, mother to Layla, and unofficial queen of community events. Amara, she said, her smile like frost gilding a window. How nice to see you out and about. Hi, Lana. You're settling in well, I hope. Willow Creek can be quaint. Amara nodded, choosing diplomacy over fire. It's peaceful. Yes, well, peace has its rules. There it was. Amara tilted her head slightly. And what might those be? Lana's smile widened just enough to show teeth. Don't get too comfortable with borrowed hearts. It wasn't a threat, not quite, but it was a warning. One of those old South white-gloved, passive-aggressive declarations that floated like sugar, but stung like vinegar. And Amara, standing in that gravel lot with her chin lifted, and Elise now peeking from the car window, felt something shift. She was done with silence. That night, as dusk folded itself over the hills and the smell of rosemary drifted from Grant's kitchen, Amara told him everything. The gossip, the not-so-innocent comments. Lana, she said that he asked, pausing mid-stir at the stove. More or less. He muttered something under his breath and wiped his hands on a dish towel. I'm sorry, he said finally. I should have known this would happen. I'm not surprised, Amara replied, but I am disappointed. Grant turned and leaned against the counter and met her gaze. Do you want to walk away? The question didn't sting. It soothed. Because it wasn't a challenge. It was an offering, her choice. No, she said, I don't scare that easy. He smiled faintly. I didn't think you did. Then he added, but if you're staying, you should know something. What's that? Grant reached above the stove, pulled down a worn leather box, and set it on the table. He opened it slowly, revealing a gleaming revolver tucked in navy velvet beside a folded photo. My grandfather's, he said. And not just a keepsake. Amara raised an eyebrow. You're showing me a gun. He chuckled. No, I'm showing you the story. He handed her the photo, an old black and white snapshot of a woman in a long coat, her stance proud a rifle slung casually over one shoulder. That's my grandmother. Everyone thought she was just a homemaker, but during the war she ran the local mail route on horseback, through storm, snow, and more than one standoff with men who thought they knew better. Amara stared at the image, heart humming. She taught me two things, Grant said. One, never underestimate a woman who shows up. Two, never give your peace to people who never earned it. She placed the photo back in the box with reverence. So what now, she asked. We eat, he said simply. We live. We laugh. And if anyone's got a problem with that, they can take it up with my grandmother. Amara laughed, and it wasn't the guarded, cautious kind she'd been giving the world. It was real. The next week when Lana passed her at school drop-off, with a little too much perfume and a little too much smugness, Amara simply smiled. She didn't need to prove anything. Not when she had a little girl who ran into her arms each day. Not when Grant met her at the door, like she was a certainty, not a question. Not when the gunslinger in her soul had finally remembered how to aim not to wound, but to stand tall. Gossip, after all, was just wind, and Amara had learned how to walk through storms. There are lines people draw without realizing they've drawn them, thin invisible threads woven through daily life, waiting for the right gust of emotion to snap them into view. Amara didn't see the line at first. It shimmered like heat on asphalt, subtle and quiet. But it was always there, and it ran straight through the bathwater. It started on a golden Saturday afternoon when the house was loud with joy. Elise had spent hours in the garden painting tiny rocks with glitter and affirmations, be kind, you matter, shine. Grant had grilled corn and salmon under a wide summer sky, music playing softly from the porch speaker. Everything felt like the promise of something lasting. Later, Amara offered to run Elise's bath while Grant cleaned up the kitchen. It had become a ritual of sorts. Amara drawing the water, adding 2 drops of lavender oil, folding a towel, just so brushing out Elise's curls before the tub filled. She wasn't replacing anyone. She wasn't trying to. But rituals have power, and sometimes power calls ghosts to the surface. As the tub gurgled to fullness, Elise chatted away about school and dreams, and whether butterflies had best friends. She climbed in with a splash, and Amara rolled up her sleeves laughing as bubbles climbed up the side of the tub. Then as she was rinsing a little foam from Elise's shoulder, the girl paused, her voice dipping to a hush. Daddy says Mommy used to do the baths. Amara's hands froze in the water. Oh, she said gently. I didn't mean to take over. I just thought. It's okay, Elise interrupted quickly, looking up with those perceptive gray eyes. I like when you do it. Then after a beat, but Grandma said maybe it's too soon. The words didn't land like knives. They landed like anchors. Heavy, slow, sinking. Amara kept her smile soft as she squeezed a washcloth. Did she say that to you? Elise shrugged. She says lots of things. I don't think Daddy agreed. Amara nodded quietly, letting that be enough. But as she dried Elise's hair later, she noticed her own fingers trembling. That night after Elise was asleep, and the stars had settled into their watchful places above the pines, Amara sat on the back porch, arms wrapped around her knees. Grant joined her, two steaming mugs in hand. You okay? He asked after a long moment. She mentioned her mom, Amara said quietly, during her bath. Grant nodded. She does sometimes. I'm glad she still talks about Anna. She also said Vivian thinks I'm stepping in too far. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. She said that at dinner last night he admitted, not in front of Elise, but she made it clear. Amara looked out into the dark, voice barely a whisper. I'm not trying to erase anyone, Grant. I know. I'm not trying to fill space that doesn't belong to me. I know that too. She turned toward him, her expression raw. But maybe I am crossing a line I can't see. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, you didn't see it, but neither did I. You've been part of Elise's rhythm, her laughter, her sleep. That didn't happen by accident. It happened because you show up, because you love her. I haven't said that out loud. You don't have to. She feels it. Amara closed her eyes for a long beat. I've spent years, she said softly, keeping boundaries so sharp they turned into walls. And now that I care, really care, I don't know how to step without second guessing. Grant leaned closer, not to fix it, but to be near, to witness. We'll make mistakes, he said. That's not what scares me. What scares me is not trying. She opened her eyes, and Vivian. She loves Elise. She misses Anna. But she doesn't get to dictate how we build something new. She doesn't get to redraw the lines we're learning to walk together. The next morning, Amara woke early. She slipped from the guest house and wandered toward the garden, her breath clouding faintly in the crisp dawn air. Vivian was there, gloves on, pruning shears in hand, snipping at roses with military precision. Couldn't sleep, Vivian asked without turning. Not really. Amara stepped closer, but not too close. I wanted to say something. Vivian arched a silver brow, still not looking up. By all means. I understand your worry, Amara said. You loved her. You still do. And I know I'm not what you imagined would come next. Vivian gave a short, dry laugh. That's the understatement of the year. Amara offered a small smile. But I also know that Elise is healing. And it's not because I'm trying to replace her mother. It's because I'm not running from her grief. I'm sitting with it. Vivian clipped one more rose. You have steel in you, she said. I respect that. But don't mistake my silence for approval. I'm not here for approval, just honesty. Vivian turned then slowly. And if I told you that your presence is both a balm and a bruise, I'd say that's what love is. They stood in the garden, a strange and quiet truce blooming between them. Vivian removed her gloves. Elise likes lavender in her bath, she said. Anna used to put too much. You don't. That's a good sign. Then she walked away. That night, Amara returned to the tub. She added 2 drops of lavender. No more, no less. Elise beamed, bubbles clinging to her curls. You're really good at this, she said. Amara kissed her damp forehead. I'm just learning. And in the steam and light and love that filled the small bathroom, the one drawn in grief and fear and memory blurred. Not vanished, just softened, enough to step across. Suriname. The day unfolded like a lullaby, soft, sun-warmed, unhurried. Late September had settled over Willow Creek, brushing the trees with amber and garnet, sweetening the air with the scent of ripe apples and turning the porch light golden by 5. Inside the Whitaker house, everything was still. Elise had gone on a sleepover with her cousin. The guest house stood quiet. and the main house for the first time in weeks held only two beating hearts. Grant was in the kitchen sleeves, rolled up a dusting of flour on his forearm, humming something that might have been Otis Redding. Amara leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him. There was a certain intimacy to the moment, one that had nothing to do with declarations or tension. Just the way he sifted cinnamon, the careful flick of his wrist as he stirred the way he smiled to himself, like a man completely at home in his body, his rhythm. "Is this your famous apple cobbler?" she asked, breaking the quiet. Grant glanced back. Famous is a strong word. "You said you made it every fall." He shrugged with a smile. "I didn't say it was good." Amara walked into the kitchen, her bare feet quiet on the cool tile. She picked up a slice of apple from the cutting board and bit into it. She said with mock seriousness. "Well, the apples are doing their part." Grant laughed, setting the bowl aside. He turned to face her. "So, no Elise, no Vivian, no PTA meetings or garden surprises, no guest house between us," she added. They stood still for a moment, the weight of the quiet settling around them like the warmth of a quilt. Outside, wind rustled the trees. Inside, something else stirred. Amara moved toward the counter and picked up the recipe card, yellowed and smeared in one corner. "This Anna's handwriting?" she asked softly. Grant nodded. "Yeah, she used to keep them all in that tin on the shelf." "I can put it back," Amara offered. He reached out gently, resting his hand over hers. "You don't have to." She looked up, surprised by the calm in his touch. Not hesitant, not heavy with memory, just present. "Is it hard," she whispered, "having someone else in her kitchen?" Grant shook his head. "It's harder not to have someone here." For a long time this house echoed. It didn't live. And now, he reached for a towel and wiped the flour from his hands, never breaking her gaze. Now it breathes again. Amara swallowed. Her chest ached, not from sadness, but from the terrifying sweetness of possibility. "I'm scared," she said, before she could stop herself. Grant stepped closer. "Of what?" "Of wanting this too much." He didn't answer with words. Instead, he touched her face, just a brush of fingers, reverent and unhurried. His thumb rested at the corner of her jaw, and he leaned in slowly, giving her every second to turn away. She didn't. Their lips met like a question and an answer all at once. It was not hungry. It was not desperate. It was homecoming. Soft. Certain. The kind of kiss that doesn't ask if you're ready, but gently reminds you that you already are. When they parted, Amara rested her forehead against his. "You didn't hesitate," she murmured. "Didn't need to." She let out a breathless laugh. "I used to think love had to be fireworks and chaos. And now I think it might be cobbler and cinnamon and a kiss in the kitchen." Grant smiled. "Then we better not burn the cobbler." They turned back to the oven, hand in hand. Later that night, long after the dessert had been devoured on mismatched plates and 2 glasses of red wine had been poured and savored, they found themselves in the living room, curled beneath a shared blanket. There was no talk of labels, no proclamations, just fingers intertwined and the quiet hum of something blooming, something tender, something real. And when Amara finally closed her eyes against his chest, she realized the fear hadn't gone away. But it had been replaced by something stronger. Trust. The day began with a tremble in the air. Not from the sky, though rain threatened in the distance, but from something quieter, more personal. A shift in the current between comfort and uncertainty. Amara felt it before she opened her eyes. The house was silent in a way that wasn't restful. It was the kind of silence that asked questions, the kind that mirrored the thoughts she hadn't said aloud. Lying in the guest house bed, her back to the window, she stared at the wooden ceiling, tracing a knot in the pine paneling with her eyes. She'd kissed Grant. She'd fallen asleep wrapped in his warmth, feeling safe, wanted, seen. And yet morning brought the old ache of doubt, not because of him, but because of her. Because joy, when you've lived without it long enough, starts to feel like a loan that must be repaid. And Amara had never learned how to spend love without saving for the heartbreak. She found the stationery by accident tucked inside an old cookbook Anna had left behind. The paper was thick ivory lined in a soft gold. It felt too fancy for grocery lists, too honest for bills. She sat at the table and began to write. "Dear Grant, this isn't goodbye, not exactly, but it's a pause. a breath I need to take before I forget how to breathe on my own. Being here has healed parts of me I didn't know were bleeding. Elise with her bright eyes and impossible wisdom. You with your steadiness, your kindness, your quiet strength. Even Vivian with her sharp edges taught me something. I didn't expect that love, even in grief, can still grow around new roots. But I don't know how to be part of something without wondering when it will end. I'm trying. God knows I'm trying. But part of me wonders if you need someone who fits better into this town, someone less complicated, someone without scars you can't see. And maybe I just need to prove to myself that I'm not here because I couldn't be anywhere else, but because I chose to be. If I don't hand you this letter, it means I'm choosing to stay. But if you find it, if it's ever in your hands, it means I had to leave to find the courage to return. Love, Amara. She folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope. Wrote his name on the front. No flourish, just Grant. Then she tucked it beneath the fruit bowl on the kitchen island, her fingers lingering on the edge. The wind outside shifted again, a soft moan through the screens. She packed slowly. Just enough for a night, maybe two. She told herself it was a retreat, not an escape. But the moment she stepped onto the path that led from the guest house to her car, a voice called out, "Elise is asking for you." It was Grant. His voice, gentle, steady, cut through her breath like morning light through mist. She turned. He stood on the porch, barefoot, mug in hand. He didn't look angry, just curious. "I was going to head out for a bit," she said, trying to sound casual. Without saying goodbye, I didn't want to make it a big deal. "It's not a big deal," he said, "unless you're running." She didn't answer. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You kissed me," he said softly. "You held my daughter like she was born in your arms. You cried on my shoulder and laughed in my kitchen. You've been brave every single day you've been here. So tell me, why are you scared now?" Because, she whispered, this is the part where things fall apart, where someone leaves, where I get left behind. Grant reached into his back pocket, pulled out something small, and unfolded it slowly. Her letter. She froze. "You weren't supposed to see that." "I wasn't supposed to see a lot of things," he said gently. "But here we are." She felt heat climb her neck, shame and panic tangled in her breath. "I just needed space to prove to yourself that this is real." She nodded. "Well, good," he said. "Because it is." Amara blinked. "I've read that letter 10 times, Grant continued. "And every line of fear you wrote in it, I've felt too. Every doubt, every ache." He stepped closer still. "But I don't need someone perfect. I don't need easy. I need real. And you are the most real thing that's walked into this house since Elise was born." A tear slipped down her cheek. Then another. He wiped it gently with his thumb. "Stay. Don't stay because you feel trapped. Stay because this us is something we can build. Not on what we lost, but on what we found." Amara breathed in deeply. The air smelled of apples, wood smoke, something sweet baking in a neighbor's kitchen. Life. "You weren't supposed to find the letter," she said again. He smiled. "I think I was." That night, Amara unpacked the small bag, hung her coat back on the hook, and slipped the letter, now creased and worn, into the back of the recipe tin. Not as a threat, not as a warning, but as proof that love doesn't always come when you're ready. Sometimes it waits for you to almost leave, just to remind you why you stay. There is a moment, always quiet, always unannounced, when you realize that healing has begun. Not with fireworks, not with fanfare, but with something softer, a child's laughter echoing from the next room, a man's hand finding yours without hesitation, a kitchen filled with scent and warmth and ordinary joy. Amara stood at the edge of the garden just after sunrise, the dew still fresh on the petals of late autumn roses. The light spilled gently over the hills, washing the Whitaker house in amber and gold. This place no longer felt borrowed. It felt hers. Not in the way of ownership, not in the way of conquest, but in the way a soul claims a melody it didn't know it had always been humming. Behind her, the porch door creaked open. "Elise wants to make pancakes," Grant's voice called out, low and drowsy, which is code for Elise wants you to make pancakes while she stirs once and eats the chocolate chips. Amara turned, her laugh rising like morning bird song. "Tell her I'll be in soon." He descended the steps, barefoot, hands tucked into the pockets of his pajama pants, hair still sleep tousled. He joined her by the roses and wrapped his arms around her from behind. For a long time they stood without speaking, just breathing, just being. I didn't think it would ever feel like this again, he said finally. Like what, like peace. She leaned her head back against his shoulder. It's not peace because nothing hurts anymore, she said. It's peace because we stopped pretending we had to do it all alone. Grant kissed her temple slow and reverent. I don't want to pretend ever again. You won't have to. They looked out across the hills, the town below, just beginning to stir the first cars, humming down sleepy roads, the cafe windows flickering to life, children chasing school buses in the distance. A world turning forward, and this time Amara felt part of it. No longer the outsider, no longer the story whispered behind hands. She had walked through rain and silence and judgment and doubt. She had come to this house as a woman in transition and stayed as one transformed. That afternoon, they hosted the fall picnic in the backyard. It had started as a suggestion from Elise, her small voice piping up at breakfast. Can we invite everyone for chili and apples and maybe pumpkin pie? Grant, who rarely said yes to anything involving that many people near his house, had simply looked at Amara. If we're doing it, she'd said, grinning, we're doing it right. So they did. Children darted through the garden with painted cheeks. Laughter spilled from the porch as neighbors passed pies and cider. Vivian arrived in a crisp navy coat carrying her famous cornbread and a tentative smile that softened the lines around her eyes. Even Lana Walsh stopped by offering a tight but civil nod and a tray of pecan bars Amara graciously accepted. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Later, as the sun sank behind the pines, Grant pulled Amara into a slow, quiet dance on the grass. There was no music, just the rhythm of footsteps and the distant thrum of contented conversation. You remember the day you arrived, he asked, voice hushed against her ear. I remember the storm. I thought maybe God had sent you to break something in me. She looked up, half amused, half tender. And now, he smiled. Now I think he sent you to rebuild it. Amara rested her head against his chest, her heart steady. No, she whispered. You rebuilt it. I just held the nails. That night, once the tables were cleared and the lights had dimmed, and Elise had fallen asleep, with her arms wrapped around a stuffed squirrel from the prize table, Grant and Amara sat on the porch with mugs of cocoa and silence between them. Not the silence of things unsaid, the silence of people who have said all the things that matter. What now? She asked softly. Whatever we want, he answered. And she believed him, because this was no longer a story about escape or loss or even rescue. This was a story about choice, about a man who let go of the past to reach for the present, about a little girl who dared to love again, about a woman who showed up in the storm and stayed long enough to bloom. And for the first time, Amara let the word forever slip through her mind without flinching. Maybe it wouldn't be neat. Maybe it wouldn't be easy, but it would be theirs. Dear reader, if this story touched something in you, if you felt seen or softened or reminded that love can find us even when we're not looking, then don't let the moment pass. Like if you've ever stood at your own crossroads, comment to share the part that lingered with you. Follow our channel so you don't miss what comes next. Because sometimes the best stories are the ones that grow slowly, like roses after rain, like healing, like home. Until next time, from our hearts to yours.